Cześć, hello, witam, and welcome to Pierogi to Prayer, the official podcast of St. Joseph's Polish Apostolate of the Diocese of Camden, coming to you from our historic home at 1010 Liberty Street in Camden, New Jersey, the heart of South Jersey's Polonia for over 130 years. I'm your host, Michael Matulevich. On November 3rd, 1984, the streets of Warszawa around the Church of St. Stanislaus Kostka were jam-packed with a wave of grieving humanity. In a country where the solemnization of funeral rites is especially pronounced, this gathering has been claimed to be the largest funeral in Polish history, as an estimated 600,000 to 1 million Poles gathered in a public show of their collective sorrow. The man who had brought such a throng of humanity together in shocked, abject sadness was a humble priest from a small village in northeastern Poland. For years, his ministry had taken on a more or less familiar pattern for many Polish priests under communism. Yet with the birth of Solidarity and the election of Karol Wojtyła as John Paul II, JerzyPopieluszko was catapulted into the spotlight. As the chaplain of the Solidarity Trade Union in a deeply devout Catholic country, Jerzy's leadership during the Msze za Ojczyznę, or the Masses for the Homeland, garnered him a following of thousands as his broadcasted sermons gave a moral voice to a movement that was eventually to topple the communist government. Yet the eyes of the faithful weren't the only ones that watched Jerzy. In the tightly controlled surveillance system through which the authorities maintained control, Jerzy was closely monitored from the beginning. In late October, the priest was kidnapped by agents of the government secret police, who proceeded to brutally beat, murder, and then throw his body into the Wisła River. The shock of the killing galvanized a nation already in the throes of a movement to replant freedom in the Polish soil. Now, over 40 years after the murder of Jerzy Popiełuszko, he is honored as a hero of Poland's fight for freedom, but also as an activist martyr, beatified by the Church in 2010. Our guest today, author and activist Judith Kelly, penned a book about Popiełuszko entitled Just Call Me Jerzy, recounting her story researching him as well as his largely unknown trips to the United States and Canada. As an activist who has been honored by the Pax Christi movement, that is the social justice arm of the Church, Judith has been an outspoken advocate for the rights of the marginalized and oppressed, and, like Jerzy, has found herself on the other side of law enforcement's ire on more than one occasion. We were exceptionally privileged that she was able to sit down with us and discuss her book, her life, and the multifaceted character of Jerzy Popiełuszko, who she has come to know so well. Her insights, which originate in a place of prayer and the well-formed understanding of Catholic social teaching, were fascinating to hear. Now, before we proceed with our conversation, one disclaimer and editorial note. In some of our past episodes, we've received criticism that certain statements that were made were interpreted as being political. We at the podcast strive to keep overt political issues out of our conversations. That being said, the nature of the social mission of the Church, as formed in a body of work known as Catholic social teaching, is one which we are nonetheless a part of. Additionally, the current hot-button topics of immigration, discrimination, freedom, and economic justice have their parallels in our Polish and Polish-American history. Our mission is to showcase that same Polish heritage and history in a way that is currently relatable in our own time, and also seen through the lens of our Catholic faith, which is so much a part of Polish heritage and at the forefront of our apostolate. Given the timeliness of national events that occurred during our recording, and also that Judith is a peace activist, and Popiełuszko is a political figure who was murdered by the state for engaging in nonviolent protests, it should come as no surprise that current events entered into our discussion. At all times, we have endeavored to adhere to Church teaching when it comes to our discussions of faith-based topics. But given the current accusatory climate, I have no doubt that there are some who will see the words that follow as criticisms of current government leaders or authorities. As will be mentioned, the call of Christ is not an easy one, and far too many confess adherence to him without reading and acting upon his actual words. If some of the discussion that follows makes you uncomfortable, then I urge you to revisit the words of the gospel themselves for yourself and take such disquiet to your prayer before registering an angry response, a response which likely isn't the voice of God.
So good morning. Welcome to Judith Kelly on this episode of Pierogi Prayer on a very snowy January. I have to preface that we're recording this as we're all kind of climbing out underneath of a major snowstorm in what I know to be the conditions of the location in Poland where our topic of today, Father Jerzy, was from. Northeast Poland is known for being cold, known for being snowy, and that's not a dig at them because that's where my family is from, and I get great pictures from them all the time. But anyway, so welcome to Judith Kelly. We're really so very fortunate and very privileged to have you on today.
It's an honor to be with you, Michael.
For those of you who don't know, I mean, I know that you, some years ago this time, that you actually came to St. Joseph's in Camden and gave a presentation on the topic. Just talk a little bit about yourself. I mean, I'll preface by saying that I found you not only through your presentation before, but your book, which I have here, called Just Call Me Jerzy, which I got from the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception gift shop in Washington. But and that's really kind of the inspiration for our talk today. But maybe just give some basic information, basic autobiographical information on yourself, and we can go from there.
All right. Happy to do that. Three things that I think might be good for you to know is that I'm from a Polish-American farm family in northeastern Pennsylvania. I love that farm, but I was anxious to see the world, so I became an exchange student in Mexico for a year, and that eventually led to Peace Corps service in Peru and a real love of Latin culture, speaking Spanish, all of that. I've been a long time peace and justice advocate in the Washington, D.C. area. And I was honored in 2022 by Pax Christi USA, the Catholic Peace Movement, as an ambassador of peace. And I keep working on any number of issues, as you can imagine. Right now, we have so many, and maybe we can get into that later.
Yeah, well, great. So, speaking of the book, let's talk a little bit about the book and the major influence. So, for anybody who is familiar with modern Polish history, sort of this post-communist era, there are a few names that crop up. You know, there's Lech Wałęsa, there's St. John Paul II, of course, and another one that is, I think, maybe not initially was well known, but certainly in recent years, is the person of Father Jerzy Popiełuszko, who was the chaplain of Solidarity and was famously martyred in the 80s during this time of upheaval during the fall of communism in Poland. So I think you explain this in sort of the last part of your book to our listeners. But how did you discover his story yourself, and sort of what drew you to him? What really prompted you to write this book?
Well, during my first full day in Kraków, Poland, and that was in 1995, I met a Franciscan priest who found out a little bit about me and said, hey, if you're interested in peace and justice, you need to go to Warsaw and visit the grave of Father Jerzy Popiełuszko. I only knew a tiny bit about him, and I just remember that I was intrigued, and the following year, I got to visit Jerzy's grave and learn about his courageous nonviolent resistance under the communist regime and his key role in the Solidarity movement. And I was especially impressed by his last public words. Let us pray to be free from fear and intimidation, but above all, free from thoughts of retaliation and violence. That, as a nonviolence activist, I felt like this guy's, to be able to say that, his last public words, before he's beaten to death and thrown in the reservoir. I was intrigued with that story. I saw the photos of his beaten face, and just the whole story of the loss was terrible. And I felt horrible, not only because of that, but as a Polish American, that I didn't know enough about what had happened during that period, especially to him. I had been teaching nonviolence, and I wanted to take Jerzy's story and place it with other nonviolent heroes like Gandhi and Dorothy Day and Oscar Romero and Martin Luther King. That same time, it was a very emotional time, I prayed at Jerzy's grave for help in finding my, quote, lost Polish family, for less frustration with the whole search, which that was what I was doing in the 90s. And the next day I took a long walk through Łazienki Park, and I had left all my materials home, and I just thought, wait. I have been really concentrating on this one person, and now, wait a minute, didn't work out. Maybe there's somebody here who knows about the Forest Service, because somebody in the family was in the Forest Service. And a series of, you could say random, but I would say miraculous encounters led me, and something was pulling me along, so that I ended up in the forestry office, and I found, in the 38 million people in Poland, the link to my mom's family. The name of her cousin was in the Polish Forest Service history, and I just thought that was wonderful, and I gave Jerzy the credit for leading me. And as I put in the book, I think he picked me out of the crowd and just said, "Okay, here's somebody. She's not violent. She's Polish. She will be so grateful for this gift that she'll keep on this the rest of her life." And yeah, thank you, Jerzy. Thank you, kid. You got it. That's how I got involved. And then to write the book, I met people in Warsaw who knew him, and I was curious about whether he'd had influences, and maybe there was something connected to the U.S. And I asked a priest, a biographer priest, Antonin Levik. He said, yeah, he had connections in Pittsburgh. But we don't have very many details. And I thought, wow, wait a minute. Pennsylvania is my home state. Maybe I could find out something. And I started back then, didn't get very far, but I went to the beatification in 2010 and really felt like if I didn't delve into this then, it might not ever happen. And that got me to Pittsburgh, and I found the graves of his aunts and the house that he used to visit, and the surviving relatives who were just wonderful about sharing photos and stories, and it gave me a lot of encouragement. They were thrilled that somebody was interested, frankly. So that's how I got into it. I thought at first that I would just do a little booklet on his travels to the U.S. when I finally figured out that he'd come 4 times. My editor said, hey, yeah, I guess we could do that, but hardly anybody in the U.S. knows who this guy is. I think you're going to have to go into his whole bio, and that took a whole lot longer. But I did the front piece of the book about his work in nonviolence and characteristics through the lens of nonviolence. I just felt that was an important thing to lift up for people. Since I didn't know about him, I figured lots of other people wouldn't know, and that's what I did.
We did a series on Father Walter Chiswick, and
great, wonderful.
Yeah, and so we did a big part of series, 4-part series from our parish on all this other stuff, and he was someone who was very close to me in terms of my spirituality. And in researching stuff with him, I actually became friends with his niece, who lives not far from me. And there was this sort of moment for me where, and I've talked about this before, where the idea of saints or blesseds or people having relatives was a little bit earth shattering in a way, because I think we grow up with sort of these ancient saints, these Saint
Yeah.
Francis of Assisi, Saint Ignatius Loyola, whoever it is, that the idea of them actually having relatives is kind of it changes our feelings as Catholics, and it's just it's an interesting experience, isn't it?
It is, and it's a wonderful experience. I've met so many great people because I was so interested and felt like I had the opportunity to go to Poland and maybe I'd find out more. The chance that I had to find the relatives of the Popiełuszkos in the U.S., and that meant just a letter out of the blue to a name and address, and I didn't know whether it was correct or not, but it was to Marek Popiełuszko, Jerzy's nephew. He emigrated early and he went to Chicago. As soon as he got that letter, he called me up and said, "Yeah, you're coming to Chicago. I'd love to meet with you." And I had just the very best time. And that was 2013. And then when I was, no, it might have been 12 now, come to think of it, but it was early in my process, and I was just thrilled to meet him and find out other members of the family and so forth. And then when I knew that I'd be going to Poland for Jerzy's name day in 2013, he said, "Well, you're going to be at the mass?" And I said, "Well, yeah." And he said, "Well, then my family's going to be there. Let me tell them that you're coming." And I, just amazing. You pinch yourself thinking you'll ever have a chance to talk with these people. And they were so excited. And at one point I heard the sister say, "Yes, Polka, she's Polish. So, hey." And then it even turned out that they invited me to go to Jerzy's hometown, and they would take me around to see where the grandmother lived and where he was an altar boy and where he went to elementary school and all. I just had an amazing time. And then we were very lucky, and they said, we don't know how grandma's going to feel, but Jerzy's mother was alive then. And we went to the house. The brother was busy, but he said, "Yeah, come on in." And just to sit in the house where Jerzy was born and talk with his mother, can you imagine? That was just tremendous for me. And I thanked her. I said, "I've been to the beatification and I heard a woman's voice from the stage, and I thought, I wonder if that's Jerzy's mother leading the rosary." And it was. And she laughed and she said, "Oh, that Malacki, the priest that invited her to come and do that." She said, "Oh, I was so nervous. I thought I would forget something or whatever." But she was just great. And that's how it's been. It's hard sometimes to coordinate with people and so forth, but when it works out, it is just a joy. And I have felt tremendously lucky. So once again, thank you, Jerzy.
Yeah, yeah. It is. It's even, and it's interesting that you brought up your sort of interest in your family's history that was bringing you to Poland.
Right.
It's something that I'm fifth generation Polish American, and there's a lot of times people are kind of amazed at how into it I am and how attached I am. And there was this sort of journey, this almost I wouldn't quite call it a mystical journey or something of that nature, but it was this sort of drawing you in that really defies explanation. And when you start really interacting with that heritage, it's almost as if there's something in your blood. If it goes back to some kind of, I don't know, ancient Slavic belief or what have you, but it's like, you start going to Poland and you start interacting with people, and you find relatives, or you go to places where your family was from, and not even that, even if you don't know, if you're there's just this sense that really can captivate you.
Absolutely.
And it's part of the reason why we're doing this, and why St. Joseph's in Camden, we do what we do, is because these are the people that have discovered this, and they want to share, and they want to tell people that are Polish American, that this is a tremendous gift that can really be so fulfilling. in your life.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm so glad you're saying that. It just feels that way for me. I finding both sides of my family eventually, and then continuing to have relationships and visits with them. Um, it's, I mean, I feel so lucky.
Hmm.
Not everybody gets that. Not, you can go and you won't find anything or anyone, but if you do, it's so enriching. It's just so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah, it really it defies explanation a lot of times. It's just it just
I read
is.
a really good piece called Voices in Your Blood,
Mm.
and it talks about when you start this genealogical research, sometimes you go to a place and all of a sudden you're having this sense that, oh, there's something here that is saying something to part of me, the genome. I get, I really don't know what it is,
Hmm.
but it's it's there,
Yeah,
and we have an amazing heritage when you talk about spiritual journeys, all the people that we're, uh, my grandparents, but all kinds of people
yeah.
have given us so much.
There is sort of that legacy and that
Abs-
heritage that's just so
Yep.
valuable. So getting back to Jerzy, it's one of those things where I was trained in history. That's my kind of my background, a history
Good
degree.
for you. Fabulous.
And yeah, it really inferred my entire life, and just how I think about things. And I found that when you're kind of studying someone for research purposes, you start to really get a sense of them, a kinship with them, and even in just the title, just call me Yesha. I mean, Popiełuszko, he seemed like he was this very approachable person who's more of this down to earth.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, two things. One, if you've had that kind of feeling with him and how that has manifested. And also, what do you think he would how would he think about sort of his canonization cause, his beatification? What do you think would his response be to that?
Mm, both good questions. As I looked at Jerzy's family and my family, there were a lot of similarities. We both grew up on farm. There were 5 kids, and 4 survived. My brother John Alexander was born in 47. That's Jerzy's same year. And he died in a motorcycle crash. I don't know. Jerzy's like brother-like to me in a sense that I've just walked with him during all this time. I obviously Polish heritage and Catholic faith. And as I learned more about how he approached life, it's very open and very kind of adventurous and inclusive. I just felt there was much to admire and emulate, and that we're on a path together in a way. He loved to travel. He loved road trips. He loved cars. He loved soccer. We're both into the World Cup. Hey, um, he had his attitude of doing something very difficult, loving your enemies. He was against evil and not the victims of evil. Those collaborators in the regime were kind of caught up in something, and he always hoped that they would have a change of heart, and he encouraged that. So, as an activist, he's accompanied me on all kinds of nonviolent actions and arrests and preparing for court and going through my first strip search in prison. Um, I've met a lot of his very close friends too, and that has been a wonderful thing. And we share a real sense of that sometimes Jerzy's memory is maybe misused and weaponized or politicized in some way. He was for everyone, not one viewpoint. So he tried to bring people together, and that's what I think I like about him a lot. As far as canonization, his humility probably would mitigate against him saying, "Oh yeah, I want to be a saint." No, it was not what he was looking for. He wasn't trying to rise in the hierarchy. He wanted to just be with people and help people and share with them in solidarity with everyone. There's a chapter where I call Solidarity of Hearts that I just think that it sums him up beautifully. He really wanted people to come together for the good of the country. People with different points of view, but they could say they love the country and want to make it work. I mentioned here that I met a number of biographers and admire their work, of course, and have drawn from it. And I said, how would Jerzy act now in this very politicized Poland, polarized Poland? He said he'd be very busy. He'd be running around, talking to everyone, trying to bring them together. And boy, do we need that now. We need lots of Jerzys, and we need people that are trying to do what Jerzy did. Jerzy admired Maximilian Kolbe and John Paul II. And Stefan Wyszynski, and the first two are already saints, and Wyszynski's a blessed now. I think Jerzy would be fine just being a blessed, but I think he knows that his family and friends in Poland have been working really hard, and here in the U.S., to get him canonized. He's thought of as a saint, and he inspires lots of people and lifts them up.
It's one of the things that first struck me in reading your book, because I, of course, had heard about Jerzy, but I didn't really know his story until I read it. And you hear a lot about this sense of what they call clericalism that exists in the church, and has been such a problem. And part of this is a little bit of insider baseball type speak for Catholics, but this sense of ambition within the church, and in Poland, because it is such a universally Catholic country, this has manifested itself in so many. I mean, people talk about clericalism here in the United States. Ought to go to Poland and see what it looks like.
Yeah, I know.
And so it struck me that in kind of every system that exists in every country, there are people that are just engineered that way. They can be greedy, they can be power hungry, they can be what have you. The ones that are sort of trying to find fame and trying to show themselves and trying to look more and more and more. And then you have the people that actually gain the notoriety that have this great humility. And, for a priest to just sort of say, call me Jerzy, call me by my first name.
Right.
Anywhere. I mean, it's, I have friends that are priests, many friends that are priests that I, of course, will talk to them by their first name, but there's always this kind of, it was almost amusing. I remember my she's probably going to kill me for saying this, but my mother accidentally called one of our pastors, this was many years ago, by his first name, and she was horrified. I mean, the look on her face of, you would have thought she thought that the chasm would open up in the earth and she'd be sucked down to hell. But there's this, there's almost this contradictory thing where it's we try to tell people to be more close to the saints and close to Jesus Christ, and then there's this barrier of unapproachability, and for him to kind of come down from that in a place that was so hierarchical and so that sort of massive respect for priests and the church, and in a time when it was, of course, difficult in Poland. I think it was extraordinary and really spoke to not only his humility, but to why he is someone who we really should emulate.
Bless you for saying that. Absolutely. I absolutely agree.
Yeah. I wanted to talk a little bit, pulling that kind of the thread of what you mentioned about your social justice work in the past, and how Popiełuszko's solidarity and your Polish identity inferred that work. But also because, not only are we recording this in the midst of a major snowstorm, we are recording this in the midst of a major storm in this country.
Absolutely.
It was just the other day that there was the killing of the gentleman out in Minnesota. And Alexander, yes. I want to hear you talk about Jerzy, both as he's been in sort of your social justice activist work, and also how he may be valuable today. You said in Poland, your friend said he would be very busy in Poland, considering how polarized it is. I think that he would be incredibly busy here. And there's this sense now too, where, there are the three cardinals that came out the other day with a very strong statement when it came to sort of foreign policy in this country. But I think that there's this moment here where the church is trying to find its way of working within our current political struggles. So I'm curious to hear, as someone who's been in this world for many years, how you see that related, how Popiełuszko can be related.
I appreciate that perspective. Um, this morning when I woke up and listened to the radio, and I heard both names from Minnesota: Renee Good, 37 years old; Alex Preti, 37 years old; JerzyPopieluszko died at 37 years old. It sort of made me think this is quite the moment to be talking about him. He's a model of nonviolence, and I don't think we lift that up enough, even though that's what Jesus was all about. So I'm thinking he would be definitely involved in these kinds of things. My admiration for him really came to the fore when this was 20 years ago, but I was inspired to act and walk onto a military base. And that meant that I would be arrested, which I was, with a big group of people. Big step on my spiritual journey, because I knew I'd be going very likely to prison for a number of months. Jerzy's message of no fear really resonated with me at that point. And he's just always been with me throughout all of these different actions and arrests and trials and spending time in prison. There's another Polish American that spent time in my prison. That would be Martha Stewart. I was in Alderson, West Virginia. She spent more time there than I did, but we warmed it up for her. So it was a really exciting time for the women there, thinking that, oh, Martha Stewart's going to come and we're going to be able to tell her all the things that need to be improved here, and she's going to be able to get that out. And she did a bit of it. But anyway, so my social justice and Catholic social teaching activities have been enhanced by the example of Jerzy and what happened in Poland and the entire solidarity movement, how important that was for the change in the whole region, how that kind of led the way. When I think of Jerzy in Poland now, there's so much anger and hatred against immigrants. I just find that, like here, he'd be involved somehow. He'd be on the border offering tea, like he offered tea to the police who were harassing him and staked out outside of his apartment. Loving enemies is a really hard thing to do, but he did it, and he was remembered for it. And I want to lift that up. I've been involved I went to Afghanistan. I went to Palestine fairly recently, December of 2024, and felt like he was with me. I always carry a small relic with me when I travel. He's just part of how I want to be in the world, and I would hope other people would feel that same inspiration. And that's part of our Polish heritage.
It's interesting you mentioned the age thing, because I'm 38. So, I sort of, in reading this book this last year when I was 37, and thinking about where I am in my life and what it would mean to lose it at that moment, in the midst of it was relative, was pretty powerful, especially with the world being as it is. And it's interesting to me. So we have this duality as Poles. Usually we're Polish and we're Catholic generally. And in interacting, that's why our podcast is called Pierogi to Prayer. We eat our pierogi and we go to mass. But you can be one or the other. And a lot of times there's this sense of Polish Catholicism that is just this checklist of, saying the right prayers and, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And when you actually get into sort of what your spirituality is, what really makes you Catholic, it is something that a lot of times can be uncomfortable for people in their present circumstances. And I've also noticed there's this sense of retrograde amnesia that pervades. And this isn't an original phenomenon. I mean, you can go back to to the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, we call it. And, when during Exodus, it seemed like, okay, you've seen the parting of the Red Sea, you've seen the 10 plagues of Egypt, and yet you still are, falling off the wagon of belief. I mean, I can't even imagine seeing miracles like that and then sort of falling into the way that the ancient Israelites did. But it's because we're people. And the further and further we get from people like living in the time of people like Jerzy Popiełuszko, and this sense of having to be reminded of what it means to really be a Christian. And I try not to make this as political as possible. There is no other greater political person in history than Jesus Christ, really, and Mary for that act. Action, I mean, you read the words of the Magnificat, and it's cast down the mighty from their thrones, and I mean, that's very revolutionary language, and it is, So I don't know if there's a question here or just an observation. Now that I think about it, but I kind of had to put that out there because I think that's where we have to get into the guts of what, especially in this time of when people are really trying to think about why they're Catholic, and there's so many resources to find out why you are Catholic and why you're a Christian, and how that interacts with your Polish heritage, and it is the people that are really noteworthy within that heritage are people like Popiełuszko. So why aren't we paying more attention to that?
Good question. You had asked if how do we keep his memory in those awful times alive during that era? And when I think of it, how so many came together to support the Solidarity movement, and then the brutal martial law crackdown, the period of repression. I wonder how we'll do if martial law is declared in our own country. The tendency towards authoritarianism in our fragile democracy is sobering. The Poles found a way. People like Jerzy and Stefan Wyszynski and John Paul II were committed to nonviolent resistance, and we need to take those lessons, I think, and live them out in our own time. We will keep their memory alive by acting as they did, without fear and with love. I have two other quotes here I'd like to add. Wałęsa, very gregarious fellow for sure, and tells great stories. I heard him say, I just keep doing the same things. Some days they lock me up, and some days they give me the Nobel Prize. So there you go. And there's the hard stuff in that process. The other person that I added in the book, the Jewish historian Adam Michnik, who was in prison and wrote from prison and had a big part of the Solidarity movement. I mean, that was important for him to be for him to be remembered. But he used a poem by Miłosz, that the course of the avalanche depends on the stones over which it rolls. And Michnik wrote from prison, and you want to be the stone that will reverse the course of events. That's our role. It's hard. If we're going to do Christian witness, we have to be ready for anything. And that's another motto that Jerzy used a lot. And I feel that's part of what we're called to do. Let's learn as much as we can of the hidden or nearly forgotten stories from Poland and the heroes there. Find that inspiration for them when everything was on the line. and then try and emulate those actions. I don't know if you've heard of Father Jan Zieja,
No.
Zieja. I love his story too. And Jerzy really was influenced in a good way by him. And I would love to know more about him. There are a lot of great people. And that's the light and the darkness. And then we get just enough light to take the next step wherever we are on our journey. So I feel it's been an honor to learn Jerzy's story and add to his history. And those of us with Polish heritage need to be especially mindful of our history and carry it forward. Our actions count. The solidarity of hearts, so to speak, like Jerzy said. And here's a quote from him. Let us be aware that in demanding the truth from others, we must live in the truth. In demanding justice, we must be fair with those who surround us. And in demanding courage and fortitude, we too must be valiant and courageous every day.
Wow. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I mean, and it is. It's a tough ask. It is. You know, it's
really.
It's not easy to do that, and to what it's not easy to be a Christian, is what it comes down to. You know,
Exactly.
It is a tough ask, because it's depending on where you are, you can end in martyrdom. And you know, and I think that's one of the reasons why the church has always held up martyrs as the sort of most genuine example of what you can do to emulate Christ. And it's tough. It really is tough. You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but what do you see as the status of his current cause? We know he's been beatified. You said you were at the ceremony, which must have been a wonderful experience.
It was.
Yeah. You know, I would love to get to Rome one day for one. But
well, his was in Warsaw. The beatification was in Warsaw, so it was a big crowd of people from the time that he lived. I think the challenge now is to draw in more young people who did not live through that era and have very different feelings about the church. For one, it's a pretty tough time in Poland, and don't know what he has to offer, because I think they're rejecting everything that has to do with the church. Teachers have told me that some of the young people that they teach are like, don't even go there. I don't want to deal with it. But the canonization process goes on. The cause was boosted fairly recently in October 22nd last year, when a group of Poles from northeastern Poland, the Podlasia region, had a brief meeting with Pope Leo at the Vatican on St. Peter's Square stage. And they were led by Jerzy's Chicago-based nephew, Marek, asking Pope Leo to bless the cornerstone of the museum that they're building to honor Jerzy in his hometown of Okope, right across the road from the house where he was born. So, and Marek he sent me photos from Rome. He was so sweet. And I was like, this looks like Rome. What's going on? He's like, we're asking to bless the cornerstone. And I said, did you remind him of the birthday link? And he said, yes, he did. So he just said, hey, I don't know if he said, hey, but Pope Leo, you and Jerzy share the same birthday, September 14th, the exaltation of the cross. When we both learned that when Pope Leo was named, we took it as a sign. We just thought, oh, that could be nice. And not only that, Pope Leo grew up in Chicago, and Marek lives in Chicago. So it's like Chicago boys, they could have a nice celebration someday. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, well, certainly we'll pray for. I didn't know about the birthday link with Pope Leo.
Yeah, isn't that great?
That is. Yeah, and it's funny. You know, there's this big misconception. I mean, I know there was a book that came out numbers of years ago that I think was called "Making Saints,"
Yeah.
that kind of talked about the process of canonization. And it's not only is it incredibly in depth, but it's also very expensive. A lot of people
Right.
don't realize that.
Yep.
So, and it's just sort of, oh, will someone be just known for being a saint, then they get attributed their miracles, and then, off there's the big reveal, and, the banner over St. Peter's Square, or where have you. But it's really a very in-depth process. It can take a long time.
Exactly. And it's from what I think I read the same book that you did. It's quite, in my mind at least, political. If the Pope is going to the Philippines, well, let's find out who's on the list there. That might be a good thing to do. He came to the U.S. and he did Junipero, or Francis came and did Junipero Serra. Remember that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And some people didn't think that was great.
Yeah.
but then again, so I don't know what's going to happen for Pope Leo, and with Poland, polarization, a lot of harshness right now. And I don't know. I mean, and they could really use lifting up Jerzy's reconciliation and inclusion and bringing people together. That would be a beautiful gesture. Whether it'll happen, I don't know. There are probably people that would not want that to happen. One of the things that I think that I'd like to mention is, and this came from the film director, Rafał Wiercinski, and he had done a lot of study of Jerzy's life to kind of bring that. I don't know if you know that film, Freedom is Within Us. It's a biography. He said a lot of attention is given to the day of Jerzy's death, and there's lots of controversy about whether it really happened on the 19th or there was something else that happened. And he said, I wish it weren't that way, and that I have adopted that too. I'd rather talk about his life and what he accomplished and not get bogged down in the details of his death. But right now, apparently that's going on in Poland again.
Yeah, I mean, my own thoughts on that would be, because Poland is still struggling with the legacy of those, 60, 70, 80, whatever years under communism. And
Right.
it's
40
years. Yeah. And, it's this sense of having to use the history properly, to showcase a certain narrative. And I'd mentioned this before, it's now everybody's a hero. Everybody was working with solidarity. Everybody was, behind the scenes. And there's no way that the Polish system of communism could have lasted as long as it did without people who were collaborating,
Right.
people who were working with the authorities, people who thought that communism was, in fact, the right system. And that is not a popular opinion. It's not popular to be on the losing side, quote unquote, losing side of history. And I think it's a problem when you get into those weeds of having to, as a historian, having to hijack history for your own ends and to sort of showcase a certain narrative. That's not history. That's propaganda, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's wrong. And moreover, it also does a huge disservice to people, as people. And I think that's why so many times, you kind of mentioned it in Poland, young people falling away from the church. And,
Right.
Pope Francis the late Pope Francis, he recently had said priests should be, have the smell of the sheep on them. They should be genuine. Right. And it's this real sense that when you hide stuff, when you showcase this certain image, when you everything is roses or everything is good and this, that, and the other thing, it's people are going to see through that, and they want to see genuineness. They want to see the good and the bad. They want to see you as a system apologize. They want to see you as a system wrestle with the difficult questions. And that's what's causing people, and it's the people who I think push back against the sort of the trends of whether it's people falling away from the church or falling away from systems or whatever you want to have it. They don't get that a lot of times. They think that, oh, we just need to and that's, I mean, you look at the sex abuse crisis. It's like we have to maintain the reputation. We have to maintain this sense where no, like people are people. People are wrestling with the real questions of life and death and suffering on a daily basis, and they're seeing the good, the bad, and the ugly. And they want to see, they're going to trust systems that see the good and bad, the ugly. That's just the way it is. And it's one of the things about, to go back to the Christianity piece, it's, we have, that's our whole gig here, is that God took on human form in order to encounter everything that we feel, so that we're not divorced from it. And it just is, it's part of this whole problem of legacy. I just, and it frustrates the hell out of me a lot of times, because it's like, just be genuine, just be real, just be truthful, just be, you know, truthful to the historical fact, truthful to what actually happened, because that's what people are going to admire. They're not going to admire the facade. It's never going to happen. So if you could ask him one question, what would it be?
Well, it would be more than one question, but just one. Okay. I discovered some notations in his original 1978 trip journal through Yugoslavia. He was writing about some dreams he was having. And those were edited out of the published version. And I can understand why in a way, but I also feel like maybe they shouldn't be messing with his authentic journal. I mean, that's what it was. It appears maybe he had a crush on somebody and was dreaming about her, and that would reflect poorly on a Catholic priest, and maybe that's why they decided to take it out. But it makes him, to me, it makes him more interesting. It makes him more human. It's just something that I wish I knew what happened there, but I don't think anything really happened. It was just, he's a young guy, and he was going through that particular year. He was going through a really hard time with his health, with his assignments. There were some parish conflicts, things that I've picked up and wondered. And then he goes on this long, long road trip all by himself. He came back from that trip sick and tired, and I kind of wonder if he was maybe even thinking leaving the priesthood, because it was such a rough time for him. But then what, like a month later, that was in August of 78, October, 2 months later, John Paul becomes Pope, and that changes everything for him. He was so excited about what could come from this, and he jumped on it, and he, both feet, doing everything he could, and eventually that led to those big masses for the country when he was the chaplain of the Solidarity. So all to say, it's a tough little thing they don't want to talk about in Poland, and I'm sort of like, well, I think he was all about truth. We should be looking at that, but anyway.
Yeah.
So you think about that, and whether this fits into your interview. It could get us both into a whole lot of trouble, but
well, I mean, I feel like I don't want to edit it out. I feel like, in the spirit of everything we've talked about, it would almost be a disservice in a way.
Well, that's why I had it in my answers.
Yeah, I tend to think of leaving things like that in, just because it's, I think that piece of priests' lives needs to be, priests who are blessed, we recognize as holy, needs to be talked about, because it's such an epidemic. I think you could use the word, amongst priests being burned out, because as parishes close, as less and less of them are around, as they're being tarred and feathered, not getting the support they need, it's not going to get any better. So I think that having real models of that life in people who are beatified, canonized, would be incredibly valuable to them, to any, and any priests who are listening to this, or or who just find that out about his story. This this realization that these are real people, and real people can be saints, and that's
Exactly.
the big thing here is that, and that's what I like. I like modern saints. I like people like Popiełuszko when I hear about them and read about them, because it is. I think that more than anything, that's what people want. People want real people that they can
Authenticity.
authenticity.
Yes,
Yes, great word for it. Of
exactly.
authenticity of experience within the faith, and it isn't always it isn't. You're not always 100%. There are valleys and there are peaks of faith and of that, and and the thing too that kind of boggles to me too is I think people really they misunderstand the 40 days in the desert Christ. I have
Mm,
long seen that within my own sort of Ignatian contemplation, meditation, imaginative prayer, that that is a metaphor, if nothing else, for everything that someone can feel. That is despair. That is, this is likely right after Saint Joseph died. He's mourning the loss of his father. He's going to be burdened with this realization during his baptism that he is going to be taking on this ministry that will ultimately end in his suffering and death. Who wouldn't be depressed about that?
exactly.
And if you can't see that in Jesus Christ, then you have missed the entire message here.
Mm,
And so
mm,
why would we only want to hold up people? Why would we only want to put pictures in our churches and statues of people who are anything but that?
yeah, yeah.
So that's my
Thank you.
story. I'm sticking to it.
Well, good for you, and I trust you to do a good job with it. Just, I, I know that it might ruffle some feathers, but then again, I think it opens a door that
Mm.
needs to get opened. So,
So I don't have any other bulleted questions on here. I don't know if
all
there
right.
was anything else you wanted to bring up, or usually I'll just kind of use this time towards the end of just saying, if there are any projects you're working on, anything you would like to sort of talk about, point people to your website, things of that
Um,
nature.
well, one thing this just came up this week. Somebody with the Nuclear Resistor, which is a activist group out in Arizona, received information about a Polish monk in a Belarusian prison, 27 years old. Just it looks like a setup because Lukashenko doesn't like Polish priests, and they're gonna do whatever they can to. Anyway, was charged with some kind of nuclear related espionage, and because there was an action or a demonstration vigil here for the 22nd of January. I took it down to be part of it in front of the White House and read this statement. And that, of course, helps folks who are doing the solidarity work to get this Polish kid out of prison.
Mm.
They're Belarusian activists who can't live in Belarus. It's too dangerous. They're in Lithuania and in Poland. And anyway, reminds me of the situation with Jerzy when he was called into his apartment and they found all these incriminating pieces of, they were
Hmm.
setting him up, and that was exactly like this kid, probably just wrong place, wrong time. And his name is Grzegorz Gavel.
Mm.
So maybe I can send that on to you and you would just know about it at least. And
Yeah,
maybe
I
there's,
I actually had seen something about that. I
did
do
you?
remember
Good.
reading. Yeah, I don't remember where it was, what news outlet, but I do remember coming across that.
Yep.
Um, the more things change, the more you know.
Exactly. Here,
It's
I'm
just
going to,
it's yeah, it just is. It's just and it's like I think about. I've understood in studying history and studying Catholicism that there are certain saints that come up at times in history when they're needed. You have Saint Francis of Assisi, who came up at a time when the church needed to be rebuilt. Saint Ignatius of Loyola, who came up during the Counter Reformation, and Saint John Paul II. And I'm almost starting to wonder if a canonization of Jerzy would be the saint we need now for Poland and the United States. I mean, he's been
yep,
here. Who else could be better model, really, of someone we need right now?
exactly. A lot of people say that we really need a Jerzy now. We need
Yeah.
that kind of commitment and that
Yeah.
kind of authenticity. There you go.
Authenticity. Well, that's a great word. That's a great
It
word.
is.
I might toy with that with the title when this comes out.
Yay, wonderful.
So
It's been fun. Thank you.
No, this has been wonderful. I really, really enjoyed it, and I feel very, very spiritually fulfilled in having this conversation. To be honest, it almost feels as if Jerzy is here with us, talking with us about everything, and
He is.
he will definitely. Yeah, I will definitely. He's becoming more and more a saint that I appreciate. Well, thank you so much, Judith. Really, I can't thank you enough. Thank you for being on this podcast, and we'll be praying through the intercession of JerzyPopieluszko for help in our world.
Amen. Amen. Thank you.
Regardless of what you may feel about Judith's work and the tenets of Catholic social teaching, I hope that your takeaway from our discussion has been a greater understanding of the person of Blessed Jerzy Popiełuszko and what his work meant for his time, and perhaps for us now. Moreover, Jerzy exists as an authentic witness to the gospel, and also as a man of great humility who wished to sow love and reconciliation with all of his fellow countrymen. As Judith quoted earlier in our interview, his final words should resonate with us always. Let us pray to be free from fear and intimidation, but above all, free from thoughts of retaliation and violence. Ultimately, Jerzy's actions came from a place of Christian love. If you come away from our discussion with an uneasiness about what we talked about, I encourage you to examine the actions of those around us. In a time when words are used as weapons to agitate and divide, ask yourself, are the voices that spurn me to action coming from Jerzy's place of forgiveness, goodness, and love? Or are they rooted in fear, hatred, revenge, selfishness, or greed? More to the point, how do my words and actions reflect what's in my own heart? The true answer to that question may be just as uncomfortable. Yet it is there, in that discomfort, that true conversion and faith often begin. If you would like more information about Father Jerzy Popiełuszko, I encourage you to listen to our follow-on episode for our Saint of the Month segment, as we will be featuring a special meditation on Father Jerzy Popiełuszko. You can also, of course, check out our Facebook and Instagram pages for links to Judith Kelly and her work, as well as more information on Jerzy Popiełuszko's life and his efforts at his canonization. Until next time, salte some pierogi and go sit with the saint. Dziękujemy, thank you, and do słyszenia.